It's Tuesday and it's time to learn some stuff. We're gonna go over idle up today, which is basically how to set up air mode before air mode was a thing on a mini quad, and what that means for people that don't understand what I'm talking about. When you go to zero throttle on a quadcopter, it's unlike a plane. You don't have control anymore until air mode was really invented. Before that, there was something called idle up, so that we went to zero throttle. The motors didn't actually completely come to a stop, because that's what would happen with a quadcopter before. If you go zero throttle, the motors would come to a complete stop, and the motors would not be spinning anymore, thus not giving you any control of the aircraft, and it would just turn into a brick. So before air mode and idle up, you know, all of us quadcopter pilots would have to stop the throttle at a low throttle percentage to where the motors were still spinning so that we had control. But idle up and air mode have kind of alleviated that, where you can just slam the stick to zero throttle if you want to go to zero throttle, and with all the new active braking and stuff that's kind of come to fruition over the last 3 to 5 years, all of that is making things a lot easier and also a lot better as far as flight characteristics are concerned. So, you know, going to zero throttle and not having the aircraft fall out of the sky is kind of the main priority why air mode was is why it's so popular. But before that, idle up was the thing that people used, and I actually got this from Chad Nowak. I'm sure he got it from someone else, but yeah, zero throttle doesn't turn the motors off, and that's why air mode is a thing. Now, why I use idle up, and this is going to be a personal opinion, and this is also going to be very related to KISS. So the people that are out there flying Betaflight that are watching this video that are saying, well, why don't you tell us how to do it with Betaflight? Well, this is completely interchangeable with Betaflight. However, some of the things that are going to happen on KISS, like when I arm my quad and the prop spin and the gyro isn't active, that is a KISS only thing to my knowledge. So that is going to be very specific to this, and people might have questions of why it does it, why it doesn't do it. It has always done it as a byproduct of something weird that KISS does, that Betaflight I don't think has ever done. So when you arm on Betaflight, the motors will not do anything, but as soon as you hit idle up switch, they become armed. And there is some safety hazards to this, and I'll explain them, but there's also some other things that could be considered safer if you really kind of understand and delve into why this is a thing, and why I personally like it. I will get to towards the end of the video. But first of all, let's go ahead and dive into exactly how to set this up. So first of all, we're going to set it up on the radio first, and then we'll move to the quad. So let's go ahead and get to the Tyrannus and set it up. Alright guys, so here's the radio. Let's go ahead and turn it on. Alright, so I've created a new model so I can show you from scratch exactly how I do this. And all I've done as far as created a new model is I just made a new model. So it's nothing special, not multi-rotor, just a plane. I've named it, so I named it idle up. And then I went in here and turned off the internal module and turned on the external module. So how I did that is I turned off this internal module right here. I turned it off so it was on, and then I turned on the external module here, and I set it to crossfire because that's what we're working with on the back here. So as far as that is concerned, this model is completely bone stock and nothing has changed. Now let's go in and adjust some things to make this thing set up like an idle up. From the main screen, we hit menu, we go page, 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 over to mixer. Now we go down in mixer and we're going to set up an arm switch. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to set up this switch right here as an arm switch. So this is SB. And we're going to back out, and you see now that I have a channel 5, which is my switch right here, which is going to be our arm switch. Now we're going to go over again, and we're going to go over to this last thing over here called special functions. You see SF1, SF2, blah blah blah, they're all blank. Okay, we're going to hit enter, and we're going to hit enter again, and then we're going to hit up, and that's going to bring us this right here, which says SA override channel 1, and it has 0 and a little blank box over here. So what we're going to do is we're going to set this switch to, I personally use this switch. You can set up on whatever switches you want. These are just the ones I use. I have it set up on this switch where the farthest position away and the closest position to me are completely disarmed, and the only one that works is when it's in the center position, and I'll show you exactly how I'm doing that. So first of all, I'll push it in the farthest position away, and you can see that this is going back and forth between farthest, middle, and closest position. Farthest position away. I'm going to hit enter. I'm going to go over to channel 1, which is throttle, which is how it is from default. We're going to hit enter, and we're going to scroll this down to -100. What that's going to do is that's going to override your throttle channel to -100. So when we're talking about 1000 and 2000 being our max throttle and 1000 being our min throttle, this is basically going to override that down 100. And why that makes sense will make more sense here in a second. So what we do, we need to make sure that we check this box. So once we have it set to a -100, we check this box. And for me, since I have the same switch but 2 different positions set, I'm going to go over here and I'm going to set again this same switch but in the closest position to me. Hit enter. I'm going to go over here and set this to -100 again. And like I said, the switch is doing the exact same thing in both positions. I just have it set up so that it only works in the middle position. Again, we need to make sure these boxes are checked. I didn't check that second box. And we're going to go in here and we're going to make sure this box is checked. So those both boxes are checked. Everything's set to -100 on both. And as you can see, when it's in the closest position to me, it's highlighted right here. When I push it away, it's highlighted. When it's in the middle position, nothing is there, and the throttle will work. Throttle does not work when it's in either of these positions. And again, you can set this up on any switch that you prefer. You could even set it up on the same switch as your arm switch, but I'll show you why I don't do that. As far as the only other thing that we're going to have to do, you hit menu, and we're going to have to go to this outputs page that I keep scrolling past. And I know you can go back. I just always X out for some reason and start over. It's just my habits. So channel 1, which is our throttle, you can see it going up and down right here. Okay. Now, if I flip my idle up position, sorry, it's actually in idle up. If I'm in the middle position, it works. If I'm in any of these other positions, it's not going to work. As you can see, throttle is not working. Now, when I'm in the middle position, it is going to work, but what we need to do is we need to make our middle position to where it's actually going to be idling, because if it's below 1000, it's not going to be idling. So we're going to hit enter. We're going to go over to our min throttle, and we're going to set that to about 84, -84. And what that does is that brings up our min command here right to about 1060 something, 1070. And I'm going to show you why. 1060 is really what we want it at, but you don't want to actually go by what's on this radio numbers here. You want to set it up on the flight controller itself, and I can talk about more of that in a minute, but that has nothing to do with really idle up. That has more so to do with setting up the quad, which is an extremely important portion of making any quad fly well, is setting it up to when you have center stick, you know it's center stick. And then when you do full command left, it's the same exact thing as full command right, and making everything linear and everything very predictable. So like I said, that's the only thing we're going to do. We're going to set channel 1 to -84.1. And as you can see, if I flip this position switch up, it doesn't work. It doesn't move here. If I flip it all the way back, it doesn't move here. If I flip it into the middle position, it does move, and that will make more sense here in a moment. So let's go ahead over the computer and we will set up the quad. Alright, so we've got the quad plugged in via USB. We'll go ahead and turn the radio on, and let's connect to the GUI here. Alright, so we're going inside the KISS GUI, and again, this is kind of like it should work on Betaflight, but I'm not going to guarantee anything. So this is how you set it up on KISS. So the only thing that we really need to worry about is up here in the right hand corner, and that is the min throttle is set to 1050, which if you want to do air mode, you're actually going to change that to 1000 or 1000. And then the other thing is that min command here is set to 1060. I think stock it's set at 1075. But yeah, we're just going to adjust min throttle to 1050, which I think is the factory number, and then min command, which I think is like 1070 or something, we're going to bring that down to 1060. Now what you need to do is you also need to set up an arm switch, which is something that you would already do. So for me, I just have it on auxiliary 1, and I have it to medium and high. Now what we need to do is we go to data outputs here. You can see that our data outputs are not centered because this is a new model. So we do need to center these, and I'll show you how to do one of them, but I'm not going to go through each individual one. We'll do roll. But if you look at your throttle here, you're going to see that you're at 1000, okay? And if I'm in my throttle position here, so I'm moving the throttle right now and nothing is happening. Now that is what you want to happen. And you also want to happen when you go to the middle position or the idle up position. You see that it jumps from 1000 to 1063, and then now the throttle works, and it goes from 1063 all the way up to 2000. And if I'm at any point in this and I click the idle up position switch in any direction, it will go back to 1000. So that is, we have it working. We want it to work. Now what would cause it not to work is if you hit the idle up position and it's under 1060. I have it at 1063, that's fine. If it was under, you would just go back to those that outputs page on the radio itself and adjust it to where it would adjust the throttle up. And you can see if I click this and I move that low end point right there, that min point, it will adjust. And if I'm below 1060, it's not going to work. It has to be above 1060 because that's what we have the min command set to. So anything around 84, negative 84 will work. And yeah, that's good. Now I was going to tell you earlier that I was going to show you how to do this, where you set up the middle position. So we do want to set up our middle positions, and you kind of just set the throttle in the middle position, and then you're going to go over to, and we're going to try to set the middle of the throttle position to 1050. I don't use any kind of weird throttle idle up, or sorry, any kind of weird throttle mixing other than the idle up, which has nothing to do with the mixing. So that's how you would set midpoint for your throttle. So we're at 0 throttle, full throttle, around center stick is right around 1500. Now it's easier to do with roll. It's a little different on throttle just because, you know, center stick is not held with a spring, so it can be a little bit awkward. You just kind of have to set it and hopefully it's centered around there. Now if we were doing roll, obviously that is centered with a spring, so you can easily see this one being adjusted. So we're going to go over to this outputs page, we're going to go to channel 2, which is roll, and we're going to adjust the center point up until it reaches 1500. And once we hit 1500, we're going to move it and make sure that when we let go it stays at 1500. And you see it's kind of jumping around, and you just want to get it as close as possible. And I move it because obviously sometimes it jumps around from, I want it to be as close to 1500 as possible. And then the other thing you need to do is you need to adjust your min point, so you see if min is all the way at 1000, and if you see if max is all the way at 2000. And it seems to be that min and max are all the way 1000, 2000. If those were not there, then we would adjust the min and the max on the radio itself to adjust them to be, you know, 1000 and 2000. Now the other thing we need to check while we're in here is we need to make sure that our arm switch works. So we see that auxiliary 1 is our arm switch, and we're seeing that it is actually doing something on screen, so it is technically working. So at this point you do have idle up working correctly. Everything should work, and I will go over exactly what all of these things do right now. Alright, so we just set up the radio and the quadcopter as far as the flight controller is concerned for idle up. Now we're going to talk about what exactly we just did and how it works. So first of all, I'll just show you how it works. I will turn on the radio and I will plug in the quad, and I unplug my video transmitter. It's just good practice. If you're not working on video, then just unplug your video transmitter or change the output power so that you're not just sitting there melting something back through the ground, as in a molten core of a video transmitter sending itself back through the earth, back to China, where it needs to be, you know, home. That's where home is. So now that we've turned everything on, the quad is initiated, we have 2 switches. Instead of 1 switch like air mode, where you turn 1 switch and the quad becomes active, the gyro is active, everything's working as if you hit 1 switch and you can fly from there. With idle up, it's slightly different. You can set it up on 1 switch, however, how I have it set up is I have 2 switches, and in the middle position of both of these switches is where I need to be able to fly. And why I do that is so that I can easily disarm if I need to disarm, and it seems to be that the middle position of my 2 3-position switches that I have chosen is the position that is the, you know, it works well for being in the air, and when I want to disarm, I know that I'm disarmed because I know the position of the switch and how it feels. So that I've just set it up to where the middle is where it's active. Now, when I arm, you're going to see something that only happens with KISS. Now this is not something that translates to Betaflight. This only happens with KISS, and this is actually a huge reason why I still use idle up and I don't use air mode. There are a little bit of a couple other reasons why I don't use air mode, but this is like a really big reason. I'd say this is 50% of why I use idle up over air mode. I think it feels better, but we'll get to that later. So check this out. On KISS, when you hit the arm switch and you have your idle up switch in the off position, the motors spin, but the gyro is not activated. So, you know, we'll put a prop on here, and it's not trying to kill me. Why would you want that? Well, first of all, why I would want that is when you crash in the field, especially when you have polycarbonate props. This is something that has become more and more of like an advantage to having this mode. When polycarbonate props became a thing, when you idle up like this and the gyros are not activated, I can actually check the blade tracking of my propellers that I just crashed with and then stop and adjust. So I don't need to take the prop off, or I'm not sitting there spinning it by hand trying to make sure that the blades are straight. And it actually makes being able to get back up in the air on the same props a lot quicker and a lot easier to do, because you literally just do this and you're like, all right, okay, that prop's screwed, let me adjust it. And then you adjust it, you check it again, and you're good to go. You put the quad down and you take it back off. It's also a huge thing to be able to check and make sure everything is working. If you arm the quad and you have one motor that's not working, and for some reason your hand moves, the quad is actually going to try to adjust itself, and if one motor is not working, it can freak out and chop your hand up. That's actually a pretty bad safety thing that not a lot of people realize. This mode enables you to be able to check and make sure, hey, all 4 motors are working, they're all spinning in the right direction, everything's fine, I just had a really hard crash. I just want to make sure everything's good. All the motors are spinning in the right direction. All of them are working. We're good to go. I'm going to set that down after I've checked my props, and we're good to go. And I can take off, and I'm not worried about making sure that one motor isn't working or something like that. I don't set the quad down and, like, you know, sit over here and arm it and act like I'm going to get eaten by the quad, because I can just arm and, you know, calmly check what I need to check. And the worst that's going to happen is, even when you have props on here, you'll see how little torque these have. I can stop them with my hand, like, super easy. You can just like push the props up against your leg and it'll stop the props. Doesn't really matter, and that's just a weird byproduct of KISS. I don't know why it does that, but that's a huge reason why I still use idle up instead of air mode. So, aside from that, how you would go about actually flying. So you would need to arm the quad, so we're clicking the arm switch, which enables the props to spin, or the motors to spin, but no gyro is activated, right? And then now we're gonna flip the idle up position switch into its position that enables our throttle to work. Now there is a downside to this, and I'll show you in a second, but I feel like this is a pretty safe method once you get used to it. So if you flip the idle up switch position to the on position, which is in the middle for me, now the gyros are activated, and you can see and hear that the quad is now trying to fly, and it, you know, is adjusting based on my movements to compensate for, you know, whatever it thinks is an external force acting on it, and it wants to remain in the same position. So now once I arm and then idle up, gyros are activated, gyros are not activated, gyros are activated, and you know, that's kind of how that works. You arm first and then you go to idle up, and that's how you go about going. And you can't actually do it the opposite way. You can't go idle up and then arm. It doesn't work like that. It has to be arm first and then idle up, and then you can fly. If you have a failsafe and you need to disarm and rearm, you actually have to push both switches off and then arm and idle up again. So it can be kind of a pain in the butt. I know when I'm fail-safed or whatever, if I've had fail-safe issues in the past, then I'm pushing both, arming, pushing both, arming, and that's just kind of why I have it set up the way I do, because I'm so comfortable with this switch position, and I know exactly what switch is in what position and what I need to do to get the quad to work again. So that is a huge like benefit, and also a negative to idle up, is you have 2 switches. They are safer personally, I think, but at the same time you're introducing more of a complex thing of an arming process, which, you know, might not be the best thing for some people that are used to just arming, disarming, whatever, they're good to go. Now the one thing that is a negative that I actually think, you know, can be a positive, but I've had instances where it was kind of dangerous. Now if you have the quad on the ground or whatever, and you arm it, the throttle, you can do whatever with it. It doesn't actually do anything. So the gyro is not activated, so the throttle is not doing anything, right? Because we're not actually sending a signal to the quad itself for throttle or aileron or anything. So I can do whatever, and nothing's going to happen when I'm in the arm position. It's just spinning, doing its thing, like just nonchalant over there. Now, if I have the throttle in any position other than 0, as soon as I flip this, it's going to go to that throttle position. So if I'm at full throttle and I flip the idle up position switch, it immediately goes to full throttle because it immediately went from seeing 1,000 microseconds to seeing 2,000 microseconds. It was exactly like me just doing this right off the line. But that can be kind of a weird thing if you're sitting there and your throttle's at mid throttle, which happens to me occasionally, very rarely, but it does happen sometimes. I'll have my throttle a little bit above idle, and I'll go to arm, and the quad is just like, it slowly takes off because the throttle is set higher than I think it's set. Now that is the one downside to idle up that I see as far as being able to, you know, be safe about it. So if you do have the throttle in any other position, then it could cause problems. You know, you can do the whole drag race thing where you arm and then just full throttle immediately. But that is kind of something that you should take into account when you're doing this. If you're trying idle up and you're trying air mode and you're going back and forth, just know that you need to keep throttle. Make sure throttle's at 0 when you arm, and you'll be fine. Now when you disarm, you need to make sure you hit the disarm switch and not the idle up switch. The idle up switch will actually just make the prop spin again, and that is kind of a weird thing with KISS. So if I'm flying and I hit the idle up, it's just going to go back to spinning. So it'll just be doing this in the grass, which is not what you want. You actually want to flip the disarm switch, which will completely kill the quad, and then you push the idle up switch, and then you restart by hitting arm and then idle up. So it's kind of confusing, but you know, that's what I use. People ask questions all the time. Why do you use that? Now, I guess the couple last things that we'll go over is the difference between idle up and air mode and why you might use idle up versus air mode. First of all, I think air mode, for me, I've always had issues with it, mainly flying really low and clipping things, and also landing. So if you land with air mode on, for the most part, from my experience, and this is like 3 years ago when I tested the very first air mode, and I've tested it every once in a while here and there. Sometimes it does it, sometimes it doesn't, but when you land on something, and if you land on it with any kind of vigor or anything hard at all, it will bounce a little bit. It'll bing, 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 and bounce. Sometimes it can be a really big bounce, sometimes it doesn't bounce at all. I've just had experience with bouncing, and I don't like that. I want it to be as consistent as possible, and with idle up, I can just land on something and it's not going to bounce off of it and fly to the moon. If I want to land on a car really smoothly, if I want to land on, you know, a perch somewhere really high and sketchy, then I want it to be as precise as possible and not bounce on me and fly into the moon. Now the other thing is when you're flying really low, say you're really low to the concrete, and you touch the concrete, air mode has a tendency to just shoot the quad off into another direction because it sees some kind of a disturbance in the force and is like, fights it and throws the quad. So those are my two gripes with air mode, and also the fact that if you're sitting there next to somebody, it's a safety thing. If your quad is like in the grass or something, or it's really close to somebody, and you arm the quad with air mode, the quad is, if it touches something, if a motor gets stopped, it's actually going to just fight and flip over, okay? With idle up, it doesn't do that. It just, you know, you would do this thing where you arm it and the motors are just spinning, and then it's just going dee 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 and doesn't freak out. And you can, obviously they would freak out before you even had a chance to arm, unless you just went like and took off, which is not usually the case. I usually, you know, spin the motors, make sure everything's good. I can hear in the audio if one of the motors is going ding 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 ding, or cogging, and then I will, you know, hit idle up and take off. So there's a couple safety things, and again, at the end of the day, this is personal preference. I personally think this is a better fit for me than air mode. It's something that I've used for the last 3.5, 4 years since Chad Nowak actually told it to me. He was like, yo man, you gotta try this, because I was actually stopping quads manually, just, you know, going down to a position where the motors wouldn't turn off. If I went full throttle negative, then it would just turn off and fall out of the sky. So when Chad showed me that, it was life-changing. And then we flew like that for, you know, the next year or so, and then air mode was introduced later that year. And that was kind of like a thing where Boris saw what we were doing and was like, yo, that's actually a really good idea, where you go 0 throttle and it doesn't fall out of the sky. And that's where air mode came from, to my knowledge. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope you learned something about air mode and idle up. I'm sure there are people that are going to say, hey, this works for me. That's great. I'm not here to change you. I'm just here to tell you what I do, okay? So the guys out there that are going to hate and say, screw air mode, screw idle up, blah, 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 just, you know, keep it civil, guys. We're here to have fun. I'm not like trying to change your whole world here. This is just what I do, and I get a lot of questions about idle up. I have probably get 3 to 5 comments on every single video that I've posted for the last 3 years about how to do idle up, and I don't know why I haven't done it. I feel like there was a lot of information on the internet that had it, but it seems like people just want to hear it from my mouth. They don't care if it's online. They just want to hear me talk about it. They want to know how I do it on my quad because it has some special sauce that's going to make them the best pilot in the world. And at the end of the day, guys, I'm just like you. I fly quads. I have fun doing it. I have the same gear as you guys. I don't have anything special. I have 3-year-old goggles, Dominator HD V2s. I got these in Hawaii the first time I went. This radio is freaking 3 years old. Obviously not this exact one, but the design is 3 years old. Everything about this stuff is pretty much old school stuff, and it works. Just find something that works, and if you don't have any problems with it, if it works well for you, just stick with it. I don't, you know, whatever. I do what I do, and I enjoy what I do, and I like my equipment. So hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you would, give me a thumbs up, and have a great week. I'll see you tomorrow or something, maybe Wednesday, for some sick live stream of doom.